I'm going to hand over now to the Commissioner, who's going to introduce this session. And here you go.
Thank you, Professor John. So good afternoon, and great to have you come back. We were interrupted slightly, so the mojo and the energy that came from Debbie has been slightly dissipated, but I'm sure there was very interesting conversation over lunch. So this is a short, sharp panel for 20 minutes. I've got slightly longer. Oh, you can ring the bell or whatever it is. And we're going to be talking about health inequities. And we've got an amazing set of people here who I'll just ask to introduce themselves in a moment. But I think what we're really after today is really what's their take, their own take on personal inequity, health inequity. And we'll have a bit of a yarn, and then we'll come back and say, okay, so what should we do when we walk out that door? What are the things that we can take home and do in our neighbourhood, work, wherever we are, online? So I'm going to start at the very end with Harry. Harry, just say hello and who you are.
Hello, there we go. Harry Lovelock, I'm Director of Mental Health, Director of Policy and Research at Mental Health Australia. I've been working in the sector a long time. I don't really want to say how long, it's been a considerable period, both in working with people with disability mental health issues in boarding houses down in St Kilda back in the day when it was a bit of a red light district, through working in mental health in the Victorian government in closing institutions, with the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists as their Director of Policy, then with the Australian Psychological Society for a number of years in that role, and now at Mental Health Australia, which is fantastic. I'm loving it.
Thanks, Harry. And now next we have the wonderful Michelle.
How's that? Better? Awesome. So my name's Michelle Blanchard, and I'm part of the team at the National Mental Health Commission. For the last 2 years, I've been leading the development of a national strategy to tackle stigma and discrimination. But prior to that, my background's been in the not-for-profit sector, and particularly working with folks who have an experience of complex mental health issues. And I bring both my lived as well as my learnt experience to this work.
You know me.
That was nice and brief. I was going to say, all their bios are online if you need to check them out. Thanks, Debbie. And Richard.
G'day. I'm Richard Osborne. I grew up in north central Victoria on a small dairy farm, and but got to the big city and got to go to university despite being severely dyslexic and things like that. So I have an interest in this area, but I'm Professor of Global Health at Swinburne University. Just got back from England and France, and most of my time was in Africa in the last 2 months, trying to understand this field of these methods for actually developing, impacting and implementing interventions that make sense and are useful. And worked with this lady for some years.
Oh, lovely. It's great. I mean, I think it's wonderful when we have so many people who have that committed collective, enthusiasm and energy, and this is what we're going to tap into in this panel. So, Debbie, you gave us a stunning presentation from your first slide all the way through. So what for you are the issues around health inequity that are important?
I think that we can talk about rights all we want to, because, it is a right for this, it's a right for that. But the problem is that the social determinants of health, being poverty, housing insecurity, education, access to work, food insecurity, social inclusion and non-discrimination, structural conflict, all those things. And I think unless we address those, we're not going to see any equity. And it's easy to think that a lot of those are perhaps in outback Australia or overseas, but the fact that it costs over $80 to visit a GP when the amount of spending money you might have after you pay the rent and pay for everything means that you just can't afford the GP. And in Australia, all those little things, we're currently in a time when it costs a lot of money to rent a house, and being able to afford that. Not everyone has that. Well, there's a lot of work around at the moment, but having equitable access, supporting people with their disability in order to be able to work. So I think that we shouldn't see these flighty social determinants as something overseas, but actually as something that we can change here and now. And I think that health equity is, yeah, I've completely lost my chain of thought then. Yeah, that'll do.
I think that was a great summary. But not only that, I think the whole passion behind a lot of this work is around that understanding the inequity from all those different lenses. And I think that you really nailed that. So thanks. Michelle, I'm going to go to you next. I know this is also a similarly shared approach, maybe.
Yeah, I think it is. And actually, as Debbie was talking earlier, I scribbled down 3 words on my page, which are actually 3 of the themes that have come out of a lot of the work that we've been doing around addressing stigma, discrimination and inequality at the Commission. And it's around dignity, respect and humanity. And for me, it's really about how we ensure that in all facets of a person's life, in all of those social determinants and those domains, people have the opportunity to choose for themselves a life of meaning and purpose, whatever that means for them, that they have the right to that highest attainable standard of both physical and mental health. And they have the dignity, treated with dignity in all of their interactions, in all of those spaces. So, I think, we talk a lot about the social determinants of health in terms of preventing illness or preventing distress. And I think there's also an enormous opportunity for us to focus on how we continue to strengthen those social determinants of health for those of us who have experienced periods of distress in our lives. One of the things that folks have told us as we've been working on this national strategy is that often it's the experience of stigma and discrimination that they experience after they've experienced an episode of distress, or they've been given a diagnosis, or have sought help from the healthcare system, that is actually the more damaging part. And that's what impacts their ability to access ongoing care for both their physical and mental health, their openness to enter into new romantic or sexual relationships, as Debbie was talking about before, to put themselves forward for jobs and to access educational opportunities that might be out there. And so I think it's really important in thinking about how we address inequity that we look at it right across the spectrum, not just in terms of how we prevent people from experiencing really difficult periods in their life, but how we continue to reduce inequity across the lifespan and across a person's experience of distress or of mental ill health or of physical health challenges as well.
Thank you. While you were talking, I was reflecting that we do have a lot of services which are about you reach out. Reach out, we're here. Reach out. And yet, how do we have a system where we recognise that not everyone is in that place to reach out for all of those reasons? So how do we reconfigure that world. Harry, you're at the national level, you reconfigure the world, don't you?
Well, hang on to your hat, because I've been losing sleep thinking about health inequity, because it makes me mad when you think about the things that Debbie and Michelle have been saying, which I agree with entirely. All the things that we agree with is being said, but the world's moving in a different direction, and that just isn't fair. And a good example is there's a comment here from Princeton psychologist Matthew Desmond that poverty is a policy choice. It persists because we allow it to, and we allow it to persist because many of us, whether we realise it or not, benefit from the exploitation of the poor, both in terms of the clothes we wear, the food we expect, the travel, the driving, all those sorts of things are increasingly embedded in the entitlements of which we believe is something that we should have. And in terms of how we spend our taxpayer dollar to help improve inequity, we're continuing to fund a private health insurance levy of $7 billion annually. Now, that is more than the total South Australian budget. It's certainly a lot more than the Queensland mental health budget, John. And that rebate has been shown to have no impact upon reducing public hospital services, which was the reason it was introduced. You know, that scare campaign, if you don't fund private hospitals, everyone's going to go to public hospital and it's going to be a mess. Well, just the argument hasn't stacked up. Then you've got $80 billion going to support private school sector. It's an enormous amount of money when you look at it. Again, creating ghettoising features of schooling. And now, instead of FOMO, we've got FOCMO, we've got fear of my child missing out. And increasingly, that's impacting upon public schooling as well, reducing people sending their kids to school and therefore affecting the amount of money going into it. So tax can play a really important part. The child tax offset in America was introduced a number of years ago, has brought 30% of children out of poverty. I mean, that's enormous impact in itself. In Australia, we've just removed the low and middle income tax offset at a point in time when cost is a huge issue for most families. And at the same time, we're introducing tax benefits to the wealthy of billions of dollars again. So to me, none of that is going to help address the issues we're talking about. I could go on, but I defer to my colleagues.
Well, there you go. I was going to say yes, well, the panel's not over yet, so, I'm sure. Richard, you have lots of different lenses to bring to this.
I've got 4 new talks after hearing these 3 presentations. I'm dyslexic, I can't even count. People are poor because they're poor. And they don't have any money. And that's, it sounds like a rhetorical statement, but it's been very well shown in many settings that if you give poor people money, they use it respectfully and they look after themselves in the extreme majority of cases. And yet we choose not to make that happen. But I'm a researcher and I need method. I need to build method and give fellow researchers methods and governments and policies method to build something which is going to actually impact on inequality. That's why I eat and live, I breathe that. What we don't do is see inequity. Most people don't see it. They can't see it. It's too hard to see. It can be not seen because of the way we were brought up, the lenses that we have, the biases that we have. We can't see it. And if we do see it too much, then it's just often too painful. We need better method to see where it is and why it is like that. But we also need to recognise that the ways in which we build and programs to reduce inequity are often not related to how they got there. The solutions can be quite different. Most of the solutions are already there. There's nothing new under the sun. There are people and policies and programs around the world who have absolutely nailed this problem, and yet we are blind to seeing those processes in place. There is so much that we can do that's not being done, the policies we've just heard here. So we really absolutely have to get better at seeing why we have these biases, understand the mechanisms of inequality, and put systematic processes in place to reduce inequality. And it is absolutely doable, but as societies, we choose not to do that.
I think that's a really good place to, in one sense, set some of the questions. And I should say also later on, if people have questions for the panel, you're more than welcome. I was just going to kind of take off on that theme, which is really about deep embedded inequity. What part of that, and any of you can answer at any time, we're freewheeling here, but what do you think is that one area that you think could be tackled first, or the one that collectively we should tackle first? And that's really open, because we have gone in this discussion already from the very personal to the very public and systemic. So that's a very broad question, and I am talking to get you guys some thinking time as well. But I do think it's important, because this is why the whole symposium is important, because there are so many different ways that we can tackle. But given all of your strengths and your experiences, what do you think would be that one thing that you would like to see nailed, or at least elevated? So I'm going to go to, yes,
Yeah.
Michelle, very good.
I can jump in, but I think actually one of the challenges is that we try and focus on the one thing that's going to make a difference. And one of the concepts that I've learnt a bit about over the last couple of years, when we've been talking about addressing change in systems, is that we treat things as a technical problem with a technical solution. It's that one thing that's going to make a difference. But actually what we need to do is engage with complexity. And that means that there are lots of things that can be true all at the same time. And there are lots of things that we need to do alongside each other to actually make a difference. If we lean too far in one direction, if we lean too far towards people's physical health, we might be ignoring their emotional well-being and their social well-being. If we focus too much on their emotional well-being and ignore their physical health, we're actually not seeing the whole person. And so I actually think the thing that we need to do is engage more with complexity in thinking about how we solve some of these very, very big systems problems. So it's not going to give us our quick thing that we can fund, but I think it's a really important concept for us to be engaging with.
Absolutely, because it's always a long game. We're going to have to get scorecards or something maybe next time. So Harry, your thoughts?
I want to build, because obviously what Michelle said is absolutely true. I don't like buying into the one thing, because we don't have to have one thing, there'll be multiple things happening. But for me, part of this goes back to what Debbie was talking about around the closure of institutions, because even though I know the motivation for governments was probably the money from the land, the movement at the time to shut institutions was around the dehumanising effect it had on putting people into congregate care where they're seen as less than human. And in some ways, that's what we've done with the disadvantaged. And the welfare system perpetuates that, unfortunately. Robo-debt would not have happened if it wasn't for the community's attitude that that's okay, that these people deserve to be treated this way, that the media supported it and promulgated it and people believed it. I mean, these are things that entrench poverty, entrench disadvantage, because we believe they deserve it. So to me, there's a whole issue around cultural change that needs to happen. For me, I think if you want to make a change, thinking about things like basic income allowance, removing the welfare structure itself by introducing a non-means-based test of providing income support to people and with a flat tax rate system where everybody pays a reasonable share of tax, are potentially ways of doing this. Obviously, we'll need a lot of thinking around how that might occur. But at the moment, I think the current system is so unbalanced towards a disadvantage, it's very hard to make gains unless there's major change.
A great panel of thinkers you are. Debbie, what are your thoughts?
I think we need to increase New Start and the pension. Like, how is anyone supposed to live on such little money? And, I think people are actually not so much, it's kind of like they've got their head in the sand. I mean, until you experience having debt and less than $100 cash in your hand and you've got to pay the rent, I don't think you've got any idea what it's like, And so I think people have got their head in the sand because they just haven't experienced what it's like. Yeah.
When we were doing consultations with people when there was the additional payments during COVID, people would say, this is the first time I've been able to buy a new winter coat, rather than going to Vinnie's. It really went to that absolutely personal quality of life, but also a bit of reaffirmation that you're worth it, that you are a valuable person. It is those small things that can make a big difference. Richard.
Good grief. In many ways, we need a lot of micro solutions because everyone is in their particular life situation because of all the particular things that got them there. So we can't really expect a one-size-fits-all is going to work. Policy initiatives, of course, people are poor and we need to enable them not to be poor. They've got to eat and be safe. We can't expect any change when there's food insecurity and housing insecurity and all that. We can't expect improvements in mental health and or the potential for downward spiral. Absolutely, one of the key things we need to have is people to be seen. The core things for the Indigenous in the anthropology work that I've been observing, when you're seen within a community, within a family, you have a value and chance to feel better about yourself and build your life in some ways or be part of a life. So it's difficult for us in research because we have our agenda. I'm big on non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases, but that's my agenda. People's agenda is, I'm just trying to keep a roof over my health. I'm just trying to get by. Well, she'd just bugger off and leave me alone. That's what I want the healthcare system to do. Leave me alone. I'm in a bit of a pain. So we have a real challenge of having our agenda as the big healthcare system and us do-gooders and what really is going on in the lives of people on a daily basis. So we need to really understand a lot of those micro agendas and have systems approach at the micro level, at scale. And that's the big dilemma for the world. How can we have a lot of micro agendas to support people on a daily basis and yet have this at scale for our policymakers to be safe? The money will be spent appropriately. But basically the money, when it's spent like that, people end up having a better life and doing better things for themselves and the people around them. So a lot of this is about the love and the connection and being seen as a human being. It's so important. So that's not one thing. I'm sorry, I've just prattled on a bit.
No, but I think that's the key when we think about moving towards an equally well country. There isn't just a one-line question in the book kind of thing, is it? That it is complexity. So my next question was going to be, what would your thoughts be? What would your advice be to everyone in the room when they walk out the door? There's something, given that they are wicked problems, that they are complex, that they are interwoven, that we're not looking at a silver or gold, platinum bullet here. We're looking at something that understands not only the human element, but the equity and systemic elements that all come together. And I think for me, that's one of the things when listening to you has really brought out that tension, because in essence, how do we shift that in the model that we have? So number one, do we presume the model should stay? No. But if you were to say to people, okay, so when you walk out, have a think about this on the bus, train, ferry, bicycle going home. Deb?
Oh, how she looks at me first. I was just thinking that one of the things I'm coming more and more to know is that it's a shame Emma McBride never stays to hear the rest of what goes on at a conference. I've been to 4 conferences when she's appeared, and 4 times she's disappeared. And I just think she should be sitting here listening to this.
That's a really good point. In fact, she did stay a wee while, but
She might have been called out, might have been the
that's
emergency.
because I was speaking. No, joke. But I think that's a really good point because it is about kind of speaking your truth to power, isn't it? To have that expression.
Yeah, and engaging with complexity in solving problems means that it's everybody's responsibility. And there's something that each of us can do, whether it's about making decisions in our own lives, about the actions that we take, whether it's about our practice in working with others, or whether it's about putting forward policy solutions or sort of systemic changes that can make a difference. And so, you know, I think that the value of really engaging with folks with lived experience to understand what it is that is going to make the biggest difference, but doing that at scale is going to be incredibly important in solving some of these challenges.
That's a good thing to think about on the train going home. Richard, what are your transport thoughts?
Transport thoughts. I'm not into patient-centred care. And I'm not into practitioner-centred care. I'm into care-centred care. We have our practitioners who have extraordinary knowledge of their communities, of all that works there. And of course, we have the lived experience of people who are being there every day. So we need this deep engagement of both these actors. But if there's one thing I'd like to do, it will solve all the problems. Let's just get gender equity right. Imagine that. If we had gender equity right, all the management, all the way in which thoughts and meetings and things are developed and implemented, if we had that right, wouldn't everything be fine? I think it would be.
Voting on that one? Harry.
Well, for me, I mean, I had a very similar message to what Michelle was talking about, so she said that, so I'll come up with something else. But equally important is to me, what we're facing is a continual privatisation of health delivery. The Better Access was a huge privatisation of existing publicly provided mental health services that ended up now being under subsidised care. All the growth is in private health, all the mental health beds, growth is in private hospitals. We're seeing the NDIS, as wonderful as it is, it's a privatised system. It's people making money out of people's disadvantage. So to me, we've got to change the message and start saying that private isn't good. It's never been, I mean, I shouldn't say it's not good, not to offend anybody, but it's certainly, in America, privatised health services have shown to be the most expensive and ineffective way to deliver services. Yet we continue to buy into that model through the things that government delivers and supports. And I think we've got to call that out, that there's a greater role for publicly provided mental health services, block-funded mental health services, low cost, targeted at the most at risk, not the most wealthy, and that there's a real role for all of us to be an advocate and provide some change and support for that to happen.
Thank you. What a great panel. I really would like to thank each and every one of you for your thoughts, but you're all a bit of rebels and disruptors, I really do believe. Absolutely, it's exactly what we need. And so I really want to thank you. There's a lot to think about going home in your transport this afternoon. So we've run out of time. We can't take some questions, but really these wonderful people, except for Harry, who I know is about to run to get on an aeroplane, will be here for a wee while, so I'm sure you can grab them. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to our panel. Just to take up a little bit of Debbie's